All right, everyone, welcome back. We are back for another hour. Yeah, hi again in a minute. So the most important question to ask you right now, have you taken full length 4? Have you taken full length 4? Heck yes, says Tom. Hey, Roberto, glad that you took it as well. So if the answer to that question is no, as much as I would love for you guys to stick around because you guys are awesome, if you have not taken full length 4, please exit out of this room. We do not want to spoil the fun for you. These sessions are fantastic, but you got to take the full length first. So yeah, see you next time in a minute. If you do take full length 4 soon, I hope to see you back here for another session. So those of you who have taken full length 4, please stick around, but I'm just stalling a bit for some of you who haven't taken it to kind of exit and get out of here. But we have seen these before. Oh, Ruth, great question. So your full lengths are your full length tests. So if you guys are early on in your class, you wouldn't have taken these yet. So tell me, what part of your class are you at? What's the last in-class session you had? Okay, Roberto, you're done. Cars 3. Yeah, so if you're done, that means you're probably at the point where you're taking full lengths this week. If you're at the intro like Ruth, you wouldn't have started taking full lengths. So Ruth, you've probably done your diagnostic and that's it. So I do highly recommend checking out your diagnostic exam results, reviewing on your own, then checking out those diagnostic review channel sessions. They're awesome. So for those of you who are ready to start taking full lengths, I saw one question about where do I find those? Well, on your syllabus, you'll see something that says full lengths. If you click on that, you'll see all of the available full lengths to you, including the AAMC full lengths. But again, you shouldn't really worry about taking lots of full lengths, especially full length 4, until you're done with your course and getting closer and closer to test day. So those of you who are sticking around, let's go ahead and dive in. We're going to look at 2 of the tougher passages today, but we have some stuff to pay attention to till then. One thing we're going to talk about quite a bit is really figuring out how we can use the AAMC and what we know about them to change our approach to CARS passages and questions. Then we'll pay attention to some of the tougher passages and trying to understand some of those tricky ones. All right, so let's talk about what we know about the AAMC and how we might tailor our studies or our approach to CARS using what they know. So tell me, what is the MCAT ultimately looking for? Tom, critical thinking, for sure. What else? What else do we know they care about? What else do we know they care about? What are they trying to test us on? Content knowledge is for sure on the other sections. For CARS, not so much. So understanding arguments, I think that goes into critical thinking some. Tell me this, does anyone ever feel like they start to panic when they start a CARS section? Yeah, I used to do the same thing. Yeah, so they're testing if you can be resourceful or manage your time and manage your mood. So we have to stay calm, which I know can be harder, but tell me this. Who out there has to be really good critical thinkers, really effective crisis managers, and staying calm in stressful situations? Yeah, absolutely, Tom. Doctors have to do that every day. So they want to see if you can do that on this test. Now, if we can really think about these 3 things and we know to expect them, we can start not to be so panicked when we see things that we expect. It's always going to be the case that you're going to be, tight for time on CARS. There's some people who can finish a little bit early, but most of you are probably going to be tight for time in this section, and most of you are going to see several passages that you think are quite challenging. So think back to your hardest CARS passage from this last full length, okay? So you tell me, when you're thinking, Tom says passage 2. He really, really didn't like passage 2. So tell me, what did you think they did to make it hard? What made it difficult? Language. Roberto said 3 for you. So even, if it's a different passage, tell me what about typical passages you consider hard make them hard. So he said language, so if there's lots of jargon in there, really long sentences, dense language, a long passage altogether, a passage that has tons of arguments, these are the things that make a passage hard. Now, tell me, who do you think the AAMC is trying to trap when they put these super tough passages in? Non-Kaplan students for sure, Tom. Tell me why. Yeah, unprepared people. Tell me why. What is it about those non-Kaplan unprepared people? Yeah, they don't read for the purpose. Outlining is so we read for the purpose. They're going to get stuck in all of that jargon, all of that hard language without moving forward. They're also not going to know that we should save those super hard passages for the end. Okay, these are things we don't want to do first. So attack those easy passages and triage. You got it. Now, what techniques are there for you doctorly individuals to take advantage of? We already mentioned some of them, right? Triaging, so very important. Looking for the big picture when you see lots of unimportant details. These are things you're going to have to do with patients. They're going to give you tons of data. You're going to have to take that data and figure out what's actually important here. Now tell me, why do many test takers miss this stuff? Why do they miss questions on these super, super hard passages? On the questions specifically, what have they done wrong? They probably read a lot for detail, Alexander, so they're probably hunting for that detail because they failed to look for the purpose, right? So falling for those faulty use of details, reading for detail, trying to memorize what you're seeing, forgetting that they could have done an easy passage first, so letting their emotions get the best of them. These are all things that you guys are not going to do. But if we remind ourselves that this is what the AMC is trying to do, if we start to feel any of those emotions, that panic over hard passage, just remind yourself, I know what they're really testing me on, so let me make sure I'm utilizing those skills. In the end, you will be prepared for anything. Even passage 2 or passage 3, which you guys thought were the absolute hardest, nothing is impossible. You have the skills to attack these passages. You just got to practice, and you got to do it on test day. And yeah, anxiety is a big problem for many, many students. What do you think is the best way to deal with test day anxiety? What do you think? Yeah, practice, practice, practice. Be prepared. If you take enough practice tests, now again, you don't want to take more than one a week, but if you take enough, you're going to have mimicked test day enough. You're going to feel confident knowing what your score is going to be. You're going to have seen plenty of hard passages, so you're going to know what to do when you get in there, okay? All right, let's use the rest of our lesson now to actually take a look at some of the hardest passages that you saw. Now, I know that a lot of us said we had a couple of passages we thought were the very hardest here. So let's kind of break them down. We're going to not necessarily get sucked into the hard language in every case, trying to figure out what it means, but we're going to try and use the clues we do understand to help us, right? So we're going to look for hints and patterns in wording. If we can't quite understand things, there are certain words that we will understand that help us get the structure. Those keywords and the patterns in sentences are really going to help us quite a bit. Now we also have to look for those hints in the question stems and hints in the answer choices if we're really struggling, right? There are going to be things that guide us to the right place, and we should be utilizing this. Unfortunately, I don't actually have the passage number, but you guys tell me, is this philosophy passage either passage 2 or passage 3, those ones that you guys said was super hard? Is this one of the hard ones? It is passage 2. Eli solved my dilemma. I thought it was one of the hard ones. I just couldn't remember what the number was. All right, so Tom, you are getting your wish. We are taking a look at passage 2. Now we're going to read some of this together. We're not necessarily going to, read everything. I'm going to try and point out to you how I would read this and how a really strong test taker would read this and not get sucked into what makes this hard. I totally agree, Tom. The language especially makes this challenging, right? So frailty of understanding is in itself no proper target for scorn and mockery. Now you might think, what the heck is frailty of understanding? Well, we know frail can mean kind of sickly, understanding, so if we had poor understanding, is no proper target for scorn or mockery. But, what do we see coming up here next? We have a keyword. But. Yeah, we're getting a contrast of some kind. So the author's basically saying here that not understanding shouldn't be a reason to be made fun of, but the unintelligent forfeit their claim to compassion. So we're getting a contrast now. Those people who don't understand should not be getting compassion when they begin to indulge in self-complacent errors and to call themselves sane critics, meaning that they are mechanics. And when relying upon their numbers, they pass from self-complacency to insolence and reprove their betters for using brains which God has not denied them, then dry up the fount of pity. There's quite a bit in this sentence, and you might be like, oh shoot, I don't know what this is talking about. Do you think there's a lot that we really need to pay attention to in this sentence? No, it's kind of more of the same thing, right? If you start to become self-complacent, we don't give you compassion anymore. From that, it gets even worse. Absolutely. The task of editing. Oh, well, now we might be getting something. What do you think the task of editing has to do with anything? We haven't seen anything about editing. What is this going to be? It's new. This is probably what the author actually cares about. You got it. So the task of editing is continually attempted by scholars who have neither enough intellect nor enough literature. Unless a false reading chances to be unmetrical or ungrammatical, they have no means of knowing that it is false. So what was the point of talking about these frailty of understanding, scorn and mockery, those who are not intelligent, we don't feel bad for? Who was the author? Tom says it's all to give a headache. But really what this is doing is this is setting up how the author feels about a certain scenario. Now, who are we really going to be talking about in the rest of this passage? Who do you think is going to be important? Who do you think is going to be important? The editors, which we could think of as possible critics for the original work. Yeah, so we're going to be looking at these editors. Now tell me, what do you think the author is going to think about an editor who's unintelligent? Yeah, they deserve what they get. We don't feel compassion for them. Absolutely. Okay, let's keep going now. If a hale man walks along the street upon two sound legs, he is not liable to be chased by crowds of cripples vociferating, "Go home and fetch your crutch." Now, this could be a little bit confusing, but basically what this is telling us is if you are okay, you're not likely to be yelled at by those who are not okay, right? Now let's see what we get after that. If a reasoning man edits a classic rationally, he is. What do you think is the point of this second piece here? If a reasoning man edits a classical rationally, he is. Yeah, so we're getting comparison, right? We see patterns in this language. So we see in this second sentence, he is, but we see in the first sentence, he is not. So what is the difference between these two examples? What's the difference between these two examples? So again, in the first one, you had someone who can, which in that example it was who can walk, cannot be criticized by those who cannot walk. But now what we're seeing in the second sentence, those who can be criticized by those who can't. Those who can't, who are we referring to again? All right, the unintelligent, and specifically, who are we talking about? The editors, absolutely. Now, I am interested. Eli mentions outlining here. Go ahead and tell me down below. Hopefully you've taken full length 4 fairly recently. Tell me, what did you put into your passage outline here for paragraph 2? What did you put in there? Have we gotten to the main point of paragraph 2 yet? Let me rephrase that. Did we get to anything new in the first 2 sentences of paragraph 2? Roberto's mentioning something that we haven't even seen yet. Yeah, we haven't gotten to the main picture of this yet, absolutely. Now, we get to our next point here. What a critic is and what advantage he has over those who are not critics can easily be shown by one example. Now, typically, when we see examples, do we consider those to be super important? No. But in this case, because we don't really know what the point of this paragraph is yet, we're going to have to use the example to figure out what they're talking about. Again, what a critic is and what advantage he has over those who are not critics can be shown. So the author doesn't tell us and then give an example. The author's using an example to show us. Let's figure out what it says. Cicero's oration Pro Rege Dietaro, I have no idea if I pronounced that correctly, was edited between 1830 and 1840 by Klotz, Soldan, and Benecke. The best manuscript, MS, then known, was the Erfurtensis, and all three editors pounced on this authority and clung to it, believing themselves safe. In 1841, Madvig, maintaining reason against superstition in Cicero's text, as I now maintain in Juvenal's impugned 17 readings adopted from the Erfurtensis by these editors, and upheld the reading of inferior manuscripts. We now possess manuscripts still better than the Erfurtensis, and in 12 of the 17 places they contradict it, they confirm the inferior manuscripts and the superior critic. All right, so long example, but what was the point? Tom's like, I hate this. What's the point here? Yeah, that there are better manuscripts out there, okay? So in 12 of the 17 places, they contradict what was originally thought of. So just because they were popular by 3 people before does not make them the best, okay? Let's keep going. But, I wonder what we're getting now, contrast. But there are editors destitute of this discriminating faculty, so destitute that they cannot even conceive it to exist, and they are entangled in a task for which nature has neglected to equip them. Do you think we need to know what this means? I know this is a really tough sentence. No, we don't. But destitute, does that sound positive or negative to you? They've neglected. Sounds pretty negative, so he's probably talking more about these editors. Let's keep going. What are they now to do? Set to and try to learn their trade? That is forbidden by sloth. Stand back and leave room for their superiors? That is forbidden by vanity. So again, he's still talking about these editors. They must have a rule, a machine to do the thinking for them. And you're absolutely right, Tom. We're getting author's voice all throughout here. If the rule is true, so much the better. If false, that cannot be helped. But one thing is necessary, a rule. 100 years ago, it was their rule to count the manuscripts and trust the majority. But, okay, so if 100 years ago the majority wins, then we see but, what do we expect next? We're going to see something different, a contradiction to that former rule. The majority is no longer going to win, you got it. But this pillow was snatched from under them by the great critics of the 19th century, and the truth was that manuscripts must be weighed, not counted, is now too widely known to be ignored. Okay? So what would we throw into our passage outline for the third paragraph? What's important? Okay, so Tom says, yeah, it was majority wins, and now we weigh them more carefully. These were the rules. Tell me, what do you think the author thinks about these rules, the one 100 years ago or the one later on? Does the author like these rules? Does he, Tom? So let's look back. This is an important point. What does the author think about these editors? So we see they must have a rule, a machine to do their thinking for them. So when he says they must have a rule, is he saying that positively or negatively? Sounds pretty negative, right? He basically is saying these editors have to have this in place to do their job, but we already know he doesn't think they do their job well. So in this example here, we get, an old rule and a new rule, but really what the author's saying is they can't do their job. They're using these rules wrongly, right? So let's keep going. The sluggard has lost his pillow, but he has kept his nature, and he must now find something else to loll on, so he fabricates to suit the change of season. Oh my goodness, how many of you read this sentence? You're like, don't know what this, I don't know what a sluggard is, I don't know what loll means, what is going on? Yeah, and there are going to be sentences like that. We got to keep going, right? His precious precept, here we go, precept I understand, of following one manuscript, I know what that is, wherever possible. Okay, so he wanted to follow one manuscript wherever possible, and clearly the author doesn't like these editors. So, engendered by infirmity and designed for comfort, no wonder if it misses the truth at which it was never aimed. So again, the author is kind of pointing fingers at these editors saying, well, if you look at just one, and you were never trying to find the truth, of course you're going to miss the mark. Its aim was purely humanitarian, to rescue incompetent editors alike from the toil of editing and from the shame of acknowledging that they cannot edit. So these rules are in place to help them, but if the rules didn't put them in the right frame of mind to actually think instead of just follow a rule, they're going to have a problem. Now let me know, did this reading help you with passage 2 here? I know this is a hard one. I know it's hard. Do you feel like you understand it a little bit more now so when we attack the questions? Yeah, Roberto, absolutely. In this paragraph, he's continually criticizing these editors. So the editors are the critics of other authors, and he's saying that they don't think. They try to follow these rules blindly instead of actually thinking about things. All right, so we're going to take a quick look at a passage outline. We talked about most of those as we were going, but an example here, paragraph 1, rational editing is looked down upon by poor editors. This is kind of where it started talking about, all right, if you don't have understanding, but, we can feel bad for you unless you're so, blind to your misunderstanding and think that you understand, we should have no compassion for you. Paragraph 2 talked about the fact that out-of-favor manuscripts being proven correct can show that past editors might be wrong. Excuse me. Paragraph 3 told us that the author mentioned the rules that were used by previous editors, but thought those rules were bad, so we got author opinion there. And in paragraph 4, author, again, doesn't like those rules, and especially trusting one manuscript whenever possible. The author doesn't like that rule because the author thinks the editor should be thinking instead of blindly following. Now, what is the one thing we're missing in our passage outline at this point? The goal. Tell me down below after our new reading here, what do you think is our goal? What is our goal? Tom, I like it. To trash the dumb editors and their use of rules. I mean, honestly, that captures the big idea. We can use big language, but we really don't have to, as long as you have the gist of it. To denounce incompetence of critics who blindly adhere to manuscripts instead of using critical interpretation. That's pretty much what Tom said. Tom just used different language, and that works here. All right, let's utilize that to tackle some questions you guys have seen before. So question 7, Roman numeral question. We have some strategy for this. According to the various arguments put forth by the author of the passage, which of the following are true about the editing of classics? All right, now take a look at my answer choices and tell me where would be a good place to start. Roman numeral 1, I concur. It has not been undertaken in the case of Cicero. So it has not been undertaken refers to editing. So this would say editing has not been undertaken in the case of Cicero. Is that true? Yeah, that's false, right? We talked about the editing of Cicero in paragraph 2. Now, because Roman numeral 1 is out, do I need to do any more work? Nope. That's it. Our correct answer has got to be answer choice C. So to be a super, super difficult passage, this question took us like 10 seconds, really. This was not long at all. These are the questions we got to tackle quick and keep on rolling to the harder ones. Let's do that. Question 8. Suppose that the author is present at a panel discussion where all of the following statements are made by other panelists. According to the argument he has put forth in the text, the author is least likely to agree with which of the following statements? Okay, so tell me, what did the author agree with? What did the author agree with? Big picture. Before we start analyzing our answer choices, what was the author's whole point? The author thought that editors could tend to follow rules and not think about what they should be using. All right, so let's look through our answer choices and see if we think the author would agree or disagree. So A, it should not be assumed that the majority of the manuscripts of a classical text are correct. Does that sound like something the author would agree with? Does that seem like something the author would agree with? Yeah, he would agree with that, which means in this case we're able to eliminate it, okay? What about B? Madvig was a better editor than Klotz, Solden, or Benecke. Now, this is a specific example. Where was this mentioned? Yeah, you go back to the passage and confirm this, right? So A here was kind of more evidence based on our overall understanding, but you could see it in paragraph 3 specifically. Answer choice B, absolutely, we saw it in our second paragraph, and here we're talking about what did we actually see? And sure enough, the author would agree or disagree with this. You can look back and see. That paragraph was all about saying that just because the majority agree with something doesn't mean it's correct. So Madvig was a better editor than Klotz, Solden, or Benecke. The author would not disagree with this, which is what we're looking for. All right, C. It is a mistake to think that one manuscript of a particular text is better than another. Tell me what you guys think there. Okay, so Roberto says agree and then it's false. So tell me what you guys are thinking about this one. Is there going to be a point where the author thinks one manuscript is better than another? Yes. And because the answer to that is yes, then this would be something the author would not agree with, because it says it's a mistake to think that one is better than the other. So our correct answer here has got to be answer choice C, okay? Because the author would think one manuscript could be better than another, which is the whole point, is where he talked about you have to figure out what works and what does not, okay? Some of these with least likely, it helps to kind of reword and start eliminating things that the author would agree with. All right, let's try another one here. Irrespective of what appears in the first paragraph, the bulk of the passage is devoted to showing that. Okay, tell me before you look at any of your answer choices, what is important here? What should we do in order to answer this question? What do we look at? We look at our goal. Now, utilizing that goal, I won't even pull up a poll because there's really only 2 of you who are answering me. So go ahead and tell me down below, what is the only answer choice that matches our goal? Yeah, Roberto and Tom, you absolutely got it. Our goal, again, was Tom said something like trashing these editors who don't know what they're doing, and you guys absolutely got it. Incompetent editors have developed methods for avoiding the difficulties of responsible editing. You got it. Very nice. All right, let's look at another one. Question 10. Which of the following general theories would be most consistent with the passage? Okay, so we want to follow what the editor would think. So ultimately, does the editor think that does the author think that any editor should follow steadfast rules? No. So let's take a look through these. A. The editor of a classical text should select one manuscript of text at random and follow that manuscript as closely as possible. Now, at random, would the author like this idea? Heck no, get rid of it. B. The editor of a classical text should compare all available manuscripts of that text, determine which is the best, and follow that manuscript as closely as possible. Tom says, sure, okay, this is maybe, right? He compared all of them. The author would like that. But then following that one, okay, we'll keep it. We'll keep it and see what else there is. C, the editor of a classical text should compare all available manuscripts of that text, and wherever the manuscripts give different readings, follow the reading given by the majority of the manuscripts. Yeah, the author didn't like majorities, right? Now, we still have that scenario where when we see, when we see different things, we follow one or the other. Yeah, C, no. Let's look at D. The editor of a classical text should compare all available manuscripts of that text, and wherever the manuscripts give different readings, follow the reading that seems most likely on its own merits to be correct. What do you guys think about D? Yeah, it is between B and D, but D is definitely the better answer because the author was all about don't follow a rule, use your brain. He said that the editors did not, they just tried to follow those rules. So most likely on its own merits to be correct is what the author would prefer. He prefers no rules, okay? So our correct answer, as you guys said, has got to be D. And you can go through and eliminate just like that when you see a question like this. All right, let's check out question 11. Suppose that a new manuscript of Cicero's Pro Rege Dietaro were discovered that agreed with the Erfurtensis manuscript in all 17 places that Magvig departed from it. What relevance would this information have to the passage? All right, well, tell me, what was the author's point of putting Magvig in there? What was the author's point of putting Magvig in there? Yeah, go for it. We can go back to the passage. So let's pop back there really quick. So if we go back to paragraph 2, you guys take a look and tell me what was the point of this. What was the point of this? Yeah, it was an example about the critics, right? So we had these 3 guys, then we had Madvig coming in later and doing some editing. All right, now ultimately, does that specific example really show what the author thinks overall? Does that specific example show what the author's opinion on these rules are? Not really. The author was giving an example of a scenario, how they used to do things, right? Okay, so does it really change the author's opinion if there was this new manuscript and it, took a different stance than Madvig in 17 places? Would it really change the author's argument? No. So with that, we can go ahead and eliminate 2 answer choices. A and B are out. Now let's look at our 2 remaining. C, it would have minimal relevance because the author argues the editor's judgment should outweigh the authority of any manuscript. Does that agree with what the author thinks? Does C agree with what the author thinks? That the editor's judgment should outweigh any rule? It does, because the whole point here is that the author said these editors did not critically think, that they followed rules blindly. So an editor who was going to use their own judgment instead of just following something blindly, the author would be all about that, okay? So our correct answer here has got to be C. Now, Roberto, if you didn't like C originally, let's look at D and see what it says. It would have minimal relevance because this hypothetical new manuscript would not necessarily be the best manuscript. So you have to ask yourselves, would being the best manuscript really be the reason that this isn't important? Remember, the author was not about having one manuscript that was best. He wanted editors to use their judgment instead of stick blindly to one that was considered the best for whatever reason. Okay? All right, perfect. With that, let's take a look at our other hard passage, which we're going to look at our humanities passage here. So what do you guys think about this one overall? What do you guys think about this one overall? Tom says tough, but not as tough. Roberto, what do you think about this one? The humanities. Yeah, another hard one. All right, so let's tackle this one as well. Now, I saw Roberto said earlier, these questions are easier now that we spent all this time analyzing it. Now, I know it feels like it's taking us a long time to go through it because I'm asking you a lot of questions. The questions I'm asking you are the things you should be thinking about as you're reading. And Eli's saying that's kind of the point here, right? So, we don't want to spend all of our time on the passage, of course. We want to be answering questions, but in order to answer those questions, we need to have a good idea of at least the structure and the main ideas, okay? Yeah, and as Eli's saying, right now, this may take you longer. So if you're struggling to finish passages on time, that's pretty normal when you're, early on in this class. As you move forward, 10 minutes should be doable. On the very hardest passages, it may take a little bit longer, but on an easy one, maybe you only spent 7 minutes. So maybe on this passage, you actually have 12 minutes on test day, okay? Now, that 12 minutes ultimately is answering the questions and the passage. So, 5 minutes would be reasonable to read something hard like this. So when we go through it, we may be taking a little bit longer because I'm going to be asking you questions. When you start doing this yourself, these are going to get faster and faster and faster. So let's walk through. Given his luminous treatment of light, sky, and water, Joseph Mallard William Turner is often viewed in hindsight as a precursor of Impressionism. Okay, so we know that Turner's important here, and we know that precursor of Impressionism is important here. I like to highlight names to help me find them. Yet, what's coming next? What's coming next? Contrast or contradiction, you got it. Yet, as Turner authority Andrew Wilton has argued, his roots lie in a specifically 18th century tradition, that of the sublime. So our contrast is not a precursor of Impressionism, but that it lies in sublime. Before landscape painting was accepted in England as the rendition of everyday reality, it was seen as the expression of a state of spiritual exaltation. So we're looking at now how it's considered sublime. So what would you throw into your passage outline for that first paragraph? What would you put in there for this? Okay, I like it. I like it. So I don't know that I would necessarily say Turner versus Wilton. You could say Turner and Wilton. We want to make sure we're getting a big picture idea, right? Because it's not that Turner said that he was a precursor of Impressionism, it's that he was viewed, often viewed, so it's many people viewed as Impressionism, versus Wilton, who said it's more of the sublime. Now, yeah, so I like how Tom says it too. We have Turner, who is maybe viewed as impressionistic, and then we have the contradictory idea that the sublime was important. Now let's keep going and see what we've got. The roots of the notion of the sublime. All right, so we're going back to the sublime idea. Wilton notes, go back to antiquity. Okay? Longinus observed, according to an 18th century paraphrase, that the effect of the sublime is to lift up the soul, to exalt it in ecstasy, so that participating, as it were, of the splendors of the divinity, it becomes filled with joy and exultation. Do you think this quote is important? Do I even really read over quotes, or should I be scanning them? Yeah, not at all, says Tom. There is something in the next 3 words, though, that is very, very important. And Tom, you got it. I scan right past that quote. I go right to the part that's important. The sublime, therefore, was understood to produce an effect of elevation toward unity with the divine. So what was the purpose of paragraph 2? Yeah, it was to define sublime, and part of that definition was that it's divine, okay? All right, let's keep going. In its origins, the sublime was associated with literary rather than visual art, as its connotations of power and mystery could most easily be conveyed in words, and its subject matter was epic, historical, or religious. To 18th century commentators, Homer, the Bible, and Milton were quintessentially sublime. So all we're getting here is that in the beginning, sublime was in literature, and we're getting some examples. When the concept was then applied to painting, this narrative emphasis was maintained, leading almost by necessity to a focus on the human figure. Because, of course, in these literary works, we were talking about these people. So, for Joshua Reynolds, Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel frescoes exemplify the sublime in art, because it did not show figures except incidentally landscape. I don't think I read that correctly. Because it did not show figures, landscape was necessarily seen as inferior. Okay, so tell me, what was the point of this third paragraph? What was the point of this third paragraph? Yeah, more examples of sublime, and specifically to show how we started with literature, we moved to art and examples of people, and we know that we eventually had to get to art of landscapes, because that's where we're eventually going to end up with Turner. So we're getting kind of a progression here. All right, let's keep going. The transition. Oh, hey, we were just talking about a progression. I bet we're on track. The transition to the conception that produced Turner's landscapes had several sources. What do you think is going to be coming in the rest of this paragraph? Yeah, we're going to be talking about Turner, and we're going to be talking about why Turner's landscapes were eventually seen as sublime, right? We're going to get these sources. So one source was the 18th century quasi-religious excitement, la 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 la, we keep going, we scan, scan, scan. A second was the rise of the middle class with leisure to travel, la la la. Finally, third, James Thomson's immensely popular nature epic, The Seasons, applied blank verse with its connotation of loftiness to the portrayal of nature's immensities. So this is one paragraph where you should save lots and lots of time. You should have known from the first sentence you're looking at sources. You scan through and you see that there are 3 reasons that eventually we were able to see Turner's landscapes as sublime. Let's keep going. By the latter part of the century, there was a well-defined notion of the sublime in literature and painting, which included nature while by no means excluding earlier reference. According to Edmund Burke's definitive essay of 1757, the sublime in nature was closely tied up with, so we're now getting examples of how we're using sublime to look at nature, vastness, lack of habitation and cultivation, and danger, which is in the reaction to high mountain passes or storms at sea, was conducive to awe. So we're getting examples, again, of different things we could see as sublime in nature. These qualities, as evoked in the painting of landscapes, produced a series of genres that Andrew Wilton stresses form the key to Turner's work: the picturesque sublime, the terrific, the sublime of the sea, mountains, darkness, la la la. So what would you see is the point of the paragraph that we just read? What's the purpose, main idea? Yeah, to connect visual art to the sublime, absolutely. So we've pretty much been outlining as we're going, so I'll let you see some example outlining here, but what I want you to think about is the one thing we haven't outlined, which is the goal. Tell me down below, what is the goal here? What was this all about? See you type in. So Tom says to explain how sublime precedes impressionism. So part of that I like, but tell me, who specifically were we talking about? Whose work did we talk about almost through this entire thing? Turner, right? So Turner needs to be involved in some way. So yeah, Roberto says discuss sublime to connect to Turner. Absolutely, and we were trying to see where did this idea of sublime really come from. So an overall goal here, and if you weren't exact, that's okay. We want to try and capture as much of the big picture as we can, but to look at the origins of Turner's landscape painting style in connection to sublime would have been a great way to kind of phrase your goal here. Now, ultimately, if you would have said discuss sublime to connect or to explain how sublime proceeds, that may have been okay, but you may have seen that on certain questions you predicted something too narrow or too broad. So that's how your goal can become really important, and it's important when you're going back to actually review your performance that you see what types of questions you're missing and what types of wrong answer choices you're selecting to see what you might need to alter with the way you read or outline moving forward. So let's try and utilize that passage outline we just looked at and that goal we just got to answer some questions. So 13, based on the information in the passage, which of the following is least likely to have been the subject of a painting of the sublime? So you tell me, what paragraph did we see those examples of art that's sublime? What paragraph? All right, so the second to last, we were getting those three factors. But in the last paragraph, we were getting kind of those examples that talked about mountains and all those other things. Okay, so we want the one that's least likely. So basically what we're looking at here, if we see something that seems like it was an example of something that was talked about as being sublime throughout the passage, we would eliminate it. If it's something that wasn't discussed as being sublime, then we keep it. So let's talk about these. A cathedral in the center of a city. Now, we talked about the whole divine idea of sublime. So would you say that a cathedral in the center of a city is likely to have seen as sublime or unlikely? All right, we have mixed opinions, and that's okay. So ultimately, where we started, right, it talked about the Sistine Chapel, it talked about other ideas. Now, in that very last paragraph, it was talking about nature scenes. But ultimately, we're looking at the entire passage to figure out, would this have been seen as sublime? So while this is not a nature scene, this is something based on other paragraphs here that the author may have seen as sublime. We can look at our others to kind of verify that if we weren't sure at first. All right, a storm at sea. A storm at sea. Yeah, that one would definitely seen as sublime from that last one, right? It talked about kind of that danger idea, kind of epic natural scenes, get rid of those. So if a storm at sea is off, what do you think about the eruption of a volcano? Yeah, get rid of it. Those kind of fall into the same boat here. All right, so let's talk about D, wheat fields by a country road. What are your thoughts there? D is indeed nature, Tom, but what's wrong with D? Yeah, this is not awe-inspiring for one thing. And if we go back, let me pop us back to that question real quick here. It said here we're looking for lack of habitation and cultivation. So if you're a farmer, do you think we have lack of habitation and cultivation? Nope. So that specific statement that I just read to you is exactly why this has got to be answer choice D. We had a specific instance that told us this would definitely not be seen as sublime. All right, let's keep rocking. We have time for some more questions. According to the author, Burke contributed to the development of the concept of the sublime by. What paragraph did we get the different things that contributed to our now idea of sublime? What paragraph is that in? That was in our second to last paragraph, right? Those three sources. So where do we get this information? We should just scan back to Burke, right? So let's find it. If we go back, let's see, this is not the right one. Where do we see it? Where does it talk about Burke? My highlighting's not up here anymore, so I got to find it myself. What does it say? I'm scanning for it at the same time you are. Here we go. It's actually our last one, right? Burke. And on test day, your highlighting will remain. So you scan for these names as you read them. So we scan to find Edmund Burke, and it says, according to Edmund Burke's definitive essay of 1757, the sublime in nature was closely tied up with vastness, la 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 la. So we thought originally we were probably going to the place of the sources, but in this case we saw the name wasn't there, so we keep reading. We scan for Edmund Burke. So with that information, now we're asking ourselves, Burke contributed to the development of the concept of the sublime by. So tell me, what did we put into our passage outline for the last paragraph? What was that all about? Yeah, connected the landscape art to sublime. So go ahead, take a look at your answer choices, and tell me down below which one best matches that prediction. All right, we have two that you guys stood out to like, so let's take a look at them. All right, so C, giving a more clear-cut definition of the sublime than earlier writers. All right, so where did we originally define sublime? That's okay, Roberto. We should definitely talk about these. If one stands out, we gotta figure out why. So C stands out because we're further defining sublime, but in a specific instance, right? We're talking about how it relates to nature. So C would have been better if we were talking about maybe the second or the third paragraph where we're giving those definitions of sublime and how it came to be. Burke, for instance, though, was specifically talking about how it related to nature, so D is definitely our best answer here. Awesome. All right, let's take a look at another Roman numeral. According to the passage, which of the following helped change the conception of the sublime in the 18th century? Okay, so in the 18th century, what changed the conception of sublime? Where do we get that information? What paragraph was that in? So paragraph 1 was talking about Turner. Paragraph 2 defined sublime. Paragraph 3, what did paragraph 3 do? If we look back at our passage outline, paragraph 3 was about how it was originally placed in literature. And then, yeah, Tom, paragraph 4 is where we talked about our specific sources that this came from. So paragraph 4 is going to be our important piece here. Now, I'm going to give you guys some time to answer this. What I want you to do is make sure you have downloaded that PDF here, but what I'll actually do is flip you back to paragraph 4 so you can take a look if you need to. And then about halfway through, I'll flip you back to question 15. So if you don't have it pulled up, you can still do it. So I'm going to put 1 minute on the clock. Oh, awesome, Tom. So you can go ahead and look at it on your own. So 1 minute on the clock to kind of practice what you would need to do on one of these hunting questions. So we're going to put 1 minute up, and I'll put that paragraph up, and we'll come back and take a look after. All right, now while we do have a strategy for our Roman numerals, tell me, do you think this was something quick to answer? No, it is not. We know exactly where to go from our passage outline, so that helps. It's a Roman numeral, so we have a strategy, that helps. But this is not a quick question. This is absolutely something you should triage with. Hopefully, sending you back to the passage to do some hunting showed that to you. Now, in our last minute here, let's take a look at a question that's going to be much easier to answer quickly and the type of question that we're going to want to do on test day. So the author suggests that as a concept of the sublime developed. Okay, so as the concept of the sublime developed. Now you tell me, what was the whole point that he was talking about as sublime developed from one thing to the next? What was our transition? Yeah, we transitioned to art. Okay, so let's take a look at our answer choices. A, it lost its connotation of closeness to divinity. Did it lose anything? Does that make sense? No, we didn't lose anything. All right, B, Historical and epic subjects were no longer seen as embodying. No longer? Does that make sense? No, get rid of it. C. Connotations previously restricted to the human figure were applied to natural scenes. What do you think there? Does that capture transition? Heck yeah, it does. It absolutely does. That has got to be our correct answer. Finally, if you just wanted to check, answer choice D, painting ceased to see. Ceased to see, nope, doesn't work. We know we wanted to add something or to gain it, as Tom said. Question 16 is the type of question that you can answer quickly without having to hunt through the passage. So triage your passages, triage your questions. Make sure that on these hard passages, you keep asking yourself what's actually important here. Scan those details because so many times you are not going to need them. With that, we are wrapping up for today. Thank you to Tom and Roberto for your awesome participation. You made this really fun, even though there were only a few of us in here. So thank you again. I hope to see you in a channel session very, very soon. Have a great rest of your Sunday.